The very idea of a second American Civil War seems almost unthinkable. Yet the divisions in our nation have deepened in recent years. Political polarization, social unrest, and economic disparities have strained the fabric of American society. While outright conflict seems far-fetched, the possibility, however remote, demands serious consideration. The question then arises, what role would the U.S. military play in such a crisis? The U.S. military, sworn to protect and defend the Constitution, would face an unprecedented challenge. A nation founded on the principle of we the people would be at war with itself. Instead of a foreign adversary, the enemy would be fellow citizens, neighbors, perhaps even family. The very foundations of military service, built on loyalty, duty, and camaraderie, would be shaken to their core. The U.S. military is not immune to the divisions plaguing society. A vast majority of the enlisted men and women lean conservative, as well as some of the leadership outside of Washington. Political affiliations run deep and regional loyalties are strong. In the event of a civil war, these fault lines could easily erupt within the ranks. Desertions will be a major problem. What do you think will happen when a soldier is asked to march on his hometown and turn his weapon on people he grew up with, friends and family? Units could fracture along ideological lines, with soldiers and commanders choosing sides based on their beliefs rather than their oaths. This potential for conflict within the military is a nightmare scenario. A house divided cannot stand, and a military divided against itself would be severely compromised. Chain of command, crucial for any military operation, would be thrown into disarray. Orders would be disobeyed, units would refuse to engage, and the fog of war would be thickened by confusion and mistrust. A second American Civil War would likely be a multifaceted conflict fought on many fronts. Unlike a conventional war with clearly defined battle lines, a civil war would be characterized by fluidity, unpredictability, and widespread violence. Urban centers, rural communities, and everything in between would become battlegrounds. Fighting a war on multiple fronts would stretch the U.S. military thin. Resources, already strained by global commitments, would be further depleted. Logistical nightmares would abound, as supply lines would be vulnerable to attack and disruption. The fog of war, always a factor in conflict, would be amplified by the complexities of fighting on home soil. The specter of insurgency. A second American Civil War would likely involve elements of insurgency and guerrilla warfare tactics. Dissident groups, armed and organized, could emerge from the shadows, blending into the civilian population. Identifying the enemy, a constant challenge in such conflicts, would be made even more difficult. The U.S. military, trained and equipped for conventional warfare, would have to adapt to the complexities of fighting an insurgency. Winning hearts and minds, often more important than winning battles, would be paramount. The line between civilian and combatant would blur, raising ethical and operational dilemmas. Concrete jungles versus rural redoubts. A second American Civil War could easily devolve into a conflict pitting urban centers against rural areas. Cities, often seen as bastions of liberalism, would stand in stark contrast to the more conservative rural heartland. This urban-rural divide, already evident in American politics, would likely define the battle lines. Urban warfare, with its close-quarters combat and high collateral damage, would test the military's resolve and capabilities. Rural warfare, characterized by vast distances and guerrilla tactics, would present its own set of challenges. The resources and realities of each setting would dictate the tempo and tactics of the conflict. The moral calculus of conflict. Perhaps the most daunting aspect of a second American Civil War would be the moral and ethical dilemmas it would pose for military personnel. Soldiers would be ordered to fight their own countrymen, potentially even friends and family on American soil. The psychological toll of such a conflict would be immeasurable. The very act of taking up arms against fellow Americans would weigh heavily on the conscience. Questions of loyalty, duty, and morality would be ever present. The psychological scars of such a conflict would likely linger long after the last shots were fired. Keep your head down and your powder dry.